"The child is not mine," the Duke of Ashbourne declared before the baptismal font. Before Duchess Rosamund could speak, he tore the ducal christening ribbon from her newborn daughter's gown and let it fall across the chapel floor. A gasp swept through the pews. Rosamund stared at her husband, certain that weakness from childbirth had distorted his words. Only 12 days had passed since she had nearly died bringing their daughter into the world. Her legs still trembled beneath her ivory gown, and every breath pulled painfully against the bandages wrapped around her waist. Yet Alistair's face held no trace of uncertainty. "Tell them you are mistaken," she whispered. "I have spent 12 nights avoiding this disgrace." His voice carried to every corner of the family chapel. "I will not spend another protecting it." The infant stirred against Rosamund's chest. Her tiny hand emerged from the lace blanket and curled around the edge of her mother's sleeve. Rosamund covered that hand instinctively. The vicar stood motionless beside the silver font. 36 relatives, tenants, and political allies watched from the pews. Some looked horrified. Others leaned forward with the terrible interest people reserved for public ruin. At the front sat Lady Lavinia Ashbourne, Alistair's widowed aunt. Her back remained perfectly straight, one gloved hand resting upon the shoulder of her grandson, Julian Vale. The 17-year-old boy was the Duke's nearest male relative. If Rosamund's child were rejected and she never bore another, Julian stood to inherit everything. "What proof have you?" Rosamund asked. Alistair removed a folded document from inside his coat. "Dr. Harcourt examined the child after the birth." Rosamund looked toward the physician. Dr. Harcourt stood near the chapel door, his gray eyes fixed on the floor. "He states that she was not born at the expected term," Alistair continued. "She was conceived while I was absent in Scotland. That is false." The words escaped Rosamund more sharply than she intended. She knew the dates of her pregnancy better than any physician. For years, she had maintained detailed medical records for the women of Ashbourne. She understood the signs of conception, the progress of an unborn child, and the many ways an expected delivery date could mislead even an experienced doctor. More importantly, she remembered the night this child had been conceived. Alistair had returned unexpectedly from Scotland after injuring his shoulder in a carriage accident. Rosamund had treated the swelling with willow bark and comfrey. He had remained in her rooms until morning. He remembered it too. She saw that knowledge flicker behind his eyes, and watched him crush it beneath wounded pride. "You know where you were," she said. "You came home on the 18th of November. My travel records say otherwise. Your travel records are wrong." A murmur moved through the congregation. Alistair's jaw tightened. Rosamund realized too late what she had done. She had challenged a duke's word before his household, his allies, and the clergyman who had come to recognize his child. He stepped closer. "Give me the baby." Rosamund retreated from him. "No." The single word changed something in his expression. For 8 years of marriage, she had yielded in public even when she opposed him in private. She had managed his estates during his absences, treated his tenants during outbreaks, and converted an abandoned orangery into a dispensary. When fever nearly killed him 3 years earlier, she had remained beside his bed for 9 days and prepared every remedy with her own hands. He had once told her he trusted her more than any living soul. Now he turned to the guards. "Remove the Duchess and her child from the family pew." 2 uniformed men advanced, though neither could look Rosamund in the face. "Alistair, she has no warm room prepared elsewhere." Then she should have considered that before putting another man's child beneath my roof. The accusation struck harder than a slap. Someone in the second row gave a quiet, delighted laugh. Rosamund looked toward Lady Lavinia. The older woman raised a lace handkerchief to her mouth, disguising whatever emotion lay beneath it. Beside her, Julian had gone pale. The guards stopped before Rosamund. "Your Grace," one murmured, "please do not make us—" "You will not touch her." The voice belonged to Mrs. Agnes Wren, the midwife who had attended Rosamund's labor. She emerged from behind the vestry curtain, dressed in plain brown wool. Her usually steady hands shook at her sides. Alistair turned. "You were instructed to remain outside, and you were instructed by God to protect your wife." Several people inhaled sharply. Dr. Harcourt finally looked up. Fear passed across his face. Not anger, but recognition. Alistair's voice became dangerously quiet. "Leave this chapel." Mrs. Wren moved toward Rosamund instead. "You heard me." The Duke signaled to a guard, but Rosamund raised one hand. "I will go willingly." Her voice sounded calm, though her heart hammered painfully. She would not let her daughter's first ceremony become the scene of her mother being dragged away. She faced the vicar. "Her name is Clara." The elderly clergyman swallowed. "Even if his grace denies her, She has a name. Record it. Alistair reached past Rosamund and pulled the embroidered ribbon entirely free from Clara's gown. The silver-threaded Ashbourne crest flashed once beneath the candles, before landing at his feet. Her name will not enter my family register, Clara began to cry. Rosamund gathered the child closer and walked down the aisle. The congregation parted as if shame itself were moving among them. No one offered an arm, though they could see Rosamund struggling to remain upright. At the chapel doors, she heard Lady Lavinia speak behind her. For the dignity of the title, perhaps Julian's position should now be formally recognized. There it was. Not grief, not shock. A solution prepared before the accusation had even been made. Rosamund paused, but did not turn. Outside, cold air struck her face. She descended the first stone step and nearly collapsed. Mrs. Wren caught her elbow while a guard pretended not to notice. "The East Cottage," he said under his breath. "The Duke ordered your belongings taken there." Rosamund stared at him. "The abandoned keeper's cottage?" He lowered his gaze. It stood beyond the oldest orchard, half a mile from the main house. Its roof leaked, its fireplace smoked, and no infant could survive a severe winter there without repairs. Alistair had not merely expelled her from the chapel, he had prepared her removal in advance. "How long has he been planning this?" Rosamund asked. The guard said nothing. Mrs. Wren guided her toward a small carriage waiting beside the graveyard wall. Unlike the Ashbourne coaches, it bore no crest. A single trunk had been tied behind it. Her entire life reduced to one piece of luggage. As the driver opened the door, Mrs. Wren stumbled deliberately against Rosamund. One hand steadied the infant, while the other pushed something beneath Rosamund's glove. "Paper. Do not examine it here," the midwife whispered. Rosamund looked into her face. "What is it?" "The record I was told to destroy." Dr. Harcourt appeared in the chapel doorway. Mrs. Wren immediately stepped back. Rosamund entered the carriage and held Clara against her chest as the vehicle rolled away from Ashbourne Chapel. Through the window, she saw her husband emerge. He stood beside his aunt beneath the stone archway, watching his wife and daughter leave without once attempting to stop them. Only Julian moved. The boy stepped away from his grandmother as though he meant to follow the carriage, but Lady Lavinia seized his wrist. Rosamund lowered the curtain. Not until the chapel disappeared behind the bare trees did she unfold the paper concealed beneath her glove. It was Clara's birth record. Mrs. Wren's signature appeared below the exact hour of delivery, followed by Dr. Harcourt's familiar black seal. But beneath it lay a second impression in dark green wax. A coiled serpent surrounded the letter V. Rosamund's breath stopped. She had seen that symbol only once before, pressed into the brass lock of a cabinet in Lady Lavinia's private sitting room, a cabinet the older woman had slammed shut when Rosamund entered unexpectedly 3 weeks before Clara's birth. Mrs. Wren leaned close enough that the driver could not hear. "Your Grace, someone entered the birthing chamber after you fainted." Rosamund tightened her arms around Clara. "Who?" "I did not see a face, but whoever it was carried the Duke's private key." Then the carriage turned toward the east orchard, and smoke rose above the trees. The keeper's cottage was already burning. "Stop the carriage!" Rosamund's cry sent the driver hauling on the reins. The wheels skidded across the frozen path as flames climbed through the keeper's cottage roof. "Stay here with the baby," Mrs. Wren ordered. She jumped down before the carriage had fully stopped, but Rosamund followed. Smoke rolled through the orchard, carrying the bitter stench of burning timber and lamp oil. This was no accidental chimney fire. The cottage had been empty for months. No hearth should have been lit, and no lamps should have contained enough oil to make the windows blaze so fiercely. "The trunk!" Rosamund shouted. Her belongings had been sent ahead. A gardener and 2 stable boys came running between the trees with buckets. Mrs. Wren seized one from a boy and threw its contents against the door. The water vanished into steam. "Your Grace, you cannot enter," the gardener warned. "My medical journals are inside. So were Clara's pregnancy records, letters from Alistair, and receipts proving which medicines Rosamund had taken before and after childbirth. If the Duke meant to challenge the child's legitimacy, those papers could defend her." A beam collapsed inside the cottage. Rosamund moved toward the door, but pain tore across her abdomen. Her knees buckled, and the gardener caught her. "Let me go. You will bleed to death before reaching the stairs." Mrs. Wren gripped Rosamund's shoulders. "Look at the windows. Whoever lit this fire wanted you to rush inside." The words stopped her. The bedroom window had been left open despite the cold. Flames poured around its frame, yet the curtains were missing. Someone had removed anything that might have slowed the fire, then spread oil throughout the room. Someone had expected Rosamund to arrive. Perhaps they had expected her to enter with Clara in her arms. A sound rose above the cracking wood, a horse moving behind the orchard wall. Rosamund turned in time to see a cloaked rider disappear between the trees. "Who is that?" she demanded. None of the servants answered. The cottage roof collapsed, sending sparks across the gray sky. The gardener pulled Rosamund backward as the front wall groaned. Her trunk had been destroyed, but the birth record remained hidden inside her glove. Rosamund returned to the carriage and pressed the document against her chest. If the person who set the fire knew about her medical records, they might also know Mrs. Wren had kept the original certificate. "We cannot remain on the estate," the midwife said. "My husband ordered me here, and someone intends to make certain you never leave." Clara's cries grew weaker. Rosamund touched the infant's cheek and felt how cold it had become. Whatever danger surrounded them, her daughter needed warmth immediately. "Take us to the dispensary." Mrs. Wren hesitated. "The Duke may have placed guards there. The dispensary stands on village land. I paid for its conversion from my marriage settlement, not from Ashbourne's treasury. It was the one building Alistair could not seize merely by issuing a household command." The driver glanced toward the burning cottage. "His Grace instructed me to take you nowhere else." Rosamund met his eyes. "Then decide whether you serve the Duke's pride or a newborn child's life." The man looked at Clara, removed his cap, and turned the carriage toward the village. By the time they reached Ashbourne Dispensary, smoke had darkened the sky behind them. A line of patients waited beneath its green-painted awning, minors with injured hands, mothers carrying feverish children, and elderly tenants who relied upon Rosamund's remedies. Their conversations ceased when she stepped from the carriage. News from the chapel had traveled faster than the fire. Mrs. Ellis, the dispensary matron, rushed outside. "Your Grace, what happened? Prepare the upstairs room. Clara is cold." The matron took one look at Rosamund's bloodless face and called for blankets and hot water. No one asked whether the child belonged to the Duke. They simply helped. Inside, Rosamund laid Clara beside the small stove, while Mrs. Wren examined her breathing. The infant's lips had lost their pink color, but after several tense minutes wrapped against warm bricks, she began to cry with greater strength. Rosamund closed her eyes in relief. A knock sounded below. Heavy, official. Mrs. Ellis entered the room carrying an envelope bearing the ducal crest. "The Duke's solicitor has arrived." "So quickly?" "He says he has an order for the surrender of the child." Rosamund rose, despite Mrs. Wren's protest. Mr. Gideon Sloane waited in the dispensary's front room beside two constables. He was a narrow man with careful manners and an appetite for obedience. "Your Grace," he bowed, "I regret disturbing you under these painful circumstances." "No, you do not." His expression tightened. He opened the document. "His Grace believes the infant may be evidence in proceedings concerning adultery and fraudulent inheritance. Until the matter is examined, the child must remain under neutral supervision." "Whose supervision?" "Lady Lavinia has offered rooms at Ashbourne Hall." Rosamund almost laughed. "You intend to take my daughter from me and deliver her to the woman whose grandson benefits from her disappearance?" Sloane avoided her gaze. "The Duke has authorized it. My husband cannot remove a nursing infant merely because he is angry. The physician has described you as medically unstable following the birth." Rosamund looked toward Dr. Harcourt's signature. Alistair had not only rejected Clara, he was building a case that Rosamund was unfit to protect her. One of the constables shifted uneasily. The other placed a hand upon his baton. "You have 10 minutes, Sloane said. "Do not compel us to use force." Rosamund returned upstairs, closed the door, and examined the birth record beside the window. The dark green seal was unusually thick. She ran a fingernail around its edge and felt something hard beneath the wax. "Bring me a blade," she told Mrs. Wren. The midwife handed her a small surgical knife. Rosamund carefully lifted the serpent seal from the parchment. Hidden beneath it was a narrow strip of paper folded twice. 4 words had been written inside. "The first child still lives." Rosamund read the sentence again. "What does it mean?" Mrs. Wren whispered. Before Rosamund could answer, glass shattered downstairs. Mrs. Ellis screamed. A man's voice thundered through the dispensary. "By order of the Duke of Ashbourne, surrender the child." But it was not Mr. Sloane speaking. Rosamund recognized the voice. It belonged to Julian Vale. Julian appeared at the top of the stairs with a pistol in his hand. Rosamund stepped between him and the cradle. Mrs. Wren reached for the surgical knife, but Julian quickly shut the door behind him. "Do not scream," he whispered. "My grandmother's men are downstairs." The commanding voice had been a performance. His hand shook so violently that the pistol barrel struck the doorframe. "Why are you here?" Rosamund demanded. To stop them taking Clara. A crash sounded below, followed by Mr. Sloane protesting that he possessed the Duke's lawful order. Julian lowered the weapon. My grandmother told me to accompany the men and ensure the child reached Ashbourne Hall. Then I heard one of them say the carriage would never arrive. Mrs. Wren went pale. They intend to kill her on the road. And blame Rosamund, Julian said. A grieving mother driven to madness. He pulled a small iron key from his pocket and held it toward her. It bore the Ashbourne crest. Rosamund recognized it immediately. Alistair kept its twin on his watch chain. It opened the private corridors, the estate archive, and rooms ordinary household keys could not enter. Is this the key carried into my birthing chamber? I do not know. I found it in my grandmother's cabinet this morning. The cabinet marked by the coiled serpent. Rosamund unfolded the hidden message. The first child still lives. What does that mean? Julian's face changed. Before he could answer, footsteps climbed the stairs. We must leave, he said. There is a delivery passage behind the medicine shelves. Rosamund lifted Clara. Mrs. Wren pushed aside a cabinet, revealing a narrow door used to bring supplies into the dispensary. Julian handed Rosamund the key. Take the river path to St. Anne's Priory. Ask for Sister Honora. You are coming with us. If I disappear, my grandmother will know I warned you. The upstairs door shuddered beneath a heavy blow. Julian raised the pistol and shouted, The Duchess refuses the Duke's order. Then, more quietly, he told Rosamund, Go. She and Mrs. Wren entered the passage. Julian closed the hidden door just as the main lock broke. Cold air rushed up from below. They descended cramped stone steps and emerged behind the dispensary stable. A saddled mare waited beside a small cart. He prepared this, Mrs. Wren murmured. Rosamund climbed in with Clara, while the midwife seized the reins. They reached the river path before shouts erupted behind them. A gunshot followed. Rosamund twisted around, but the dispensary had vanished beyond the hedges. Do not stop, she said, though every instinct demanded that she return for Julian. The path narrowed beside the swollen river. Clara remained quiet beneath Rosamund's cloak. Too quiet. Rosamund pressed 2 fingers beneath the infant's chin. A pulse answered, weak but steady. The Priory stood 6 miles away. They had traveled less than 1 when hoofbeats approached from behind. 3 riders appeared around the bend. Mrs. Wren struck the reins, but the cart could never outrun them. Ahead, a stone bridge crossed the river. A fallen tree blocked half its entrance, leaving barely enough space for a horse. We abandoned the cart, Rosamund said. They stopped behind a wall, took Clara, and led the mare through the narrow gap. The pursuing riders reached the bridge moments later. One tried to force his horse around the tree. The animal reared, throwing him into the mud. The others dismounted and continued on foot. Rosamund and Mrs. Wren entered the woods beyond the river. Thorn branches tore at Rosamund's gown. Her body screamed for rest, but she kept moving until the voices behind them faded. At last, bells rang through the trees. St. Anne's Priory rose behind an ivy-covered wall. Sister Honora opened the gate before they knocked. She was elderly, tall, and blind in one eye. Her gaze fell upon Clara. You came too late, she said. Rosamund tightened her hold. For what? The nun touched the dark green seal on the birth record. Lady Lavinia used this mark 17 years ago, when she brought another newborn girl here and ordered us to record her death. Julian was 17. Rosamund felt the truth shifting beneath her feet. Whose daughter was she? Sister Honora looked directly at her. Your husband's. Rosamund searched the nun's face for any sign of confusion. Alistair had a daughter before our marriage? Sister Honora opened the gate wider. Not here. The riders will search the road. She led them through a covered passage into a small infirmary. Mrs. Wren placed Clara near the fire, while Rosamund remained standing, unwilling to surrender another moment to weakness.
Tell me everything. 17 years ago, Lady Lavinia arrived after midnight with a newborn girl. She claimed the mother had died, and the father wished the child placed with another family.
The father was Alistair? We discovered that later. Sister Honora unlocked an old desk and removed a leather register. One page recorded the arrival of an unnamed infant. Beside it was the same green serpent seal. The child was healthy, the nun continued. 2 days later, Lady Lavinia returned with Dr. Harcourt. They ordered us to record that the baby had died from a fever, but she had not. No, she was taken north and raised under another name. Rosamund looked at the physician's seal on Clara's birth record. Harcourt had helped erase one daughter and now stood ready to erase another. Why would Lavinia conceal Alistair's first child? His father was negotiating his marriage to an heiress. A child born to a village apothecary's daughter would have caused scandal. Rosamund's expression hardened. And Alistair allowed it? He was told both mother and child died during the birth. The answer offered Rosamund no comfort. Alistair might have been deceived then, but he had chosen distrust now. He had remembered returning from Scotland and still permitted Harcourt's document to outweigh his wife's word. "Where is the girl?" Sister Honora hesitated. The Priory bell rang once. Not for prayer. A warning. "They have reached the gate," the nun said. Mrs. Wren lifted Clara while Sister Honora guided Rosamund toward the infirmary's rear door. "I will not keep running without answers. The girl calls herself Eleanor Reed. She works in the Ashbourne estate archive." Rosamund stopped. Eleanor. The quiet young clerk who had brought Rosamund copies of Alistair's travel accounts 2 months earlier. She had dark hair, gray eyes, and a crescent-shaped mark beneath her left ear. Clara bore the same mark. Dr. Harcourt had claimed it proved another man's blood. Instead, it connected both girls to Alistair. A fist struck the Priory gate. "Opened by order of the Duke of Ashbourne." Sister Honora pressed the leather register into Rosamund's hands. "This proves the child brought here did not die, but Eleanor herself is the only person who can prove where she was raised." Rosamund hid the register beneath her cloak. "Is there another exit?" The burial tunnel leads beyond the southern wall. They descended into the crypt as the gate splintered above them. Clara whimpered in Mrs. Wren's arms. Rosamund moved beside her through the darkness, following Sister Honora's lamp past rows of stone tombs. At the tunnel entrance, the nun stopped. "You must reach Eleanor before Lady Lavinia does. Come with us. You are a witness." "I will delay them." Rosamund caught her hand. "They may hurt you. I remained silent 17 years ago because I feared a powerful family. That silence has already harmed 2 children." She closed Rosamund's fingers around a second document. It was a receipt signed by Dr. Harcourt for payment received on the night Eleanor was removed. The payment had not come from Lavinia's private account. It bore Alistair's father's seal. The deception had reached the previous duke, and Lavinia had preserved it long enough to weaponize against his son. Rosamund and Mrs. Wren entered the burial tunnel. Behind them, Sister Honora lowered the iron gate. They emerged beyond the Priory wall near an abandoned mill. From there, the estate archive lay 4 miles east. The sun had begun to set when they reached its rear courtyard. One window stood open. Papers littered the snow beneath it. Rosamund pushed inside. Shelves had been overturned. Ledgers lay torn across the floor, and the cabinet containing Alistair's travel records had been forced open. "Eleanor?" she called. A faint sound came from beneath the clerk's desk. Rosamund found the young woman curled against the wall, blood darkening her hair. She was alive, but barely conscious. "Lady Lavinia?" Eleanor whispered. "She knows you found the record." Rosamund knelt beside her. "Can you stand?" Eleanor gripped Rosamund's sleeve. "Do not trust the Duke's travel accounts. His journey was changed because he returned home secretly." "I know. I was with him." "No." Eleanor struggled to focus. "You do not understand. He returned because someone sent him a letter claiming you were meeting another man." Rosamund went still. "Who wrote it?" Eleanor reached beneath her dress and produced a crumpled letter. Rosamund recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her own, yet she had never written those words. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. The door opened, and Alistair entered with a pistol drawn. His gaze moved from his injured daughter to the wife he had condemned. Then he saw Clara's matching crescent mark. The weapon slipped from his hand. Alistair stared at the crescent mark beneath Clara's ear. Then he looked at Eleanor. The same pale curve rested against her skin, half hidden beneath her blood-matted hair. "What is this?" he asked. Rosamund rose between him and both girls. "The consequence of trusting everyone except your wife." Alistair flinched, but she felt no satisfaction. He had entered armed, after publicly rejecting Clara and authorizing men to seize her. One shocked expression could not erase those choices. Mrs. Wren pressed a folded cloth against Eleanor's wound. "She needs a physician." "No physicians chosen by Ashborne," Rosamund said. Alistair's gaze moved to the forged letter in her hand. "Where did you obtain that?" "Eleanor found it among your altered travel accounts." He reached for it. Rosamund stepped back. "You have already destroyed enough evidence. I did not burn the cottage. But you sent me there." His mouth tightened. "I believed it was empty and habitable. You did not inspect it. You did not ask where Clara would sleep. You gave an order, because humiliating me mattered more than keeping her alive." Alistair lowered his hand. Outside, horses entered the courtyard. Eleanor stirred. "They found us." Alistair went to the window. 4 men dismounted beside an enclosed carriage. Dr. Harcourt climbed out behind them. "Those are not my guards," the Duke said. "They carried your order at the dispensary." Rosamund's words landed with deliberate precision. "Your authority opened every door for them." Alistair looked toward Clara again. For the first time, fear replaced anger. "There is an underground records vault," Eleanor whispered. "The entrance is beneath the copying table." Rosamund and Mrs. Wren moved the injured girl, while Alistair pushed aside the heavy table. A square iron ring appeared in the floor. He pulled it open, revealing stone steps. "Take Clara below." "Are you ordering me again?" "No." His voice broke slightly. "I am asking you to let me delay them." Rosamund studied him. She still did not trust his judgment, but she understood danger. She placed the leather register and forged letter beneath her cloak, then helped Mrs. Wren guide Eleanor into the vault. Before descending, Rosamund handed Alistair the private key Julian had given her. "Your aunt possessed this." Alistair stared at it. "I gave Lavinia access to the estate archive after my father died, and she used it to alter your journey, enter my birthing chamber, and manufacture a case against your daughter." He closed his fist around the key. The outer door opened. Rosamund descended and pulled the trapdoor nearly shut, leaving a narrow gap. "Your Grace," Dr. Harcourt called. "Thank heaven we found you." Alistair stood in the center of the archive. "Why are you here?" "To retrieve your wife. She attacked one of your men and abducted the infant." Beneath the floor, Rosamund felt Eleanor tense. "Did you examine Clara after her birth?" Alistair asked. "I did." "Describe the mark beneath her left ear." Silence followed. "A small blemish," Harcourt finally answered. "Does it prove she is not mine?" "It is associated with another family." "Which family?" Harcourt hesitated too long. Alistair's voice hardened. "My mother had the same mark." One of the men moved toward the overturned shelves. Dr. Harcourt said quickly, "Your wife is dangerously unstable. She has convinced you to doubt clear medical evidence." "No. Rosamund is the clearest mind in this county. I knew that before I married her. The admission came too late to soften anything within her." "Yet you signed an order calling her unstable," Harcourt reminded him. Alistair's silence revealed the trap. If he defended Rosamund now, he exposed his own recklessness. If he upheld the order, he surrendered her to the conspiracy. The Duke had valued certainty because it protected his pride. Now every document carrying his signature had become a weapon against him. A floorboard creaked near the vault. One of the men had found the iron ring. Alistair drew his pistol. "No one searches this archive without my permission." Harcourt gave a thin smile. "You surrendered that authority this morning." He produced a document bearing the royal secretary's seal. "Pending investigation into fraudulent succession, Ashbourne's records and heirs are now under temporary crown supervision." Alistair took the paper. Rosamund could not see his face, but she heard the change in his breathing. The order had been issued 3 days earlier, before Clara's baptism. Lady Lavinia had prepared the seizure of the estate before Alistair publicly rejected his child. She had merely waited for him to create the scandal that justified it. Then Eleanor squeezed Rosamund's wrist. "There is something you must know about that order," she whispered. "I saw the original." "What changed?" "The name of the person appointed to control Ashbourne." Above them, Harcourt ordered the men to search the vault. Eleanor looked toward the trapdoor. "The original named you, Duchess." The iron ring began to rise. Rosamund placed Clara in Mrs. Wren's arms and drew the surgical knife from the midwife's bag. The trapdoor lifted an inch. Then a gunshot exploded above them. The iron panel slammed shut as a man fell across it. Clara began crying, her frightened wails echoing through the vault. "Now they know we are here," Mrs. Wren whispered. Rosamund searched the dark chamber. Shelves of old rent books lined the walls, but there was no visible second exit. "Eleanor, where is the original royal order?" "In the sealed correspondence room at Ashbourne Hall." "Then Lavinia has it." "No, I hid it before she could destroy it." Another shot sounded overhead. Eleanor pointed toward a shelf of mining ledgers. "Move the 3rd volume." Rosamund pulled it free. A narrow iron lever lay behind it. When she pressed down, part of the stone wall shifted inward, exposing a passage. "My grandfather built it during the smuggling years," Eleanor said weakly. "It ends beneath the old toll house." Rosamund and Mrs. Wren supported her between them. They had barely entered the passage when the trapdoor opened behind them. Dr. Harcourt's voice filled the vault. "Duchess, surrender the child, and no one else needs to die." Rosamund closed the hidden wall. They followed the tunnel until Eleanor's knees gave way. Blood had soaked through the cloth around her head, and her pulse fluttered beneath Rosamund's fingers. "She cannot continue," Mrs. Wren said. "She cannot remain here either." Rosamund opened her medicine case. Most of its contents had been lost with her trunk, but Mrs. Ellis had placed several bottles inside before they fled the dispensary. Rosamund cleaned Eleanor's wound and examined her pupils. "No fracture," she said, "but she needs rest." Eleanor caught her wrist. "The order is inside the blue succession ledger. Lady Lavinia never touches it because Julian's name does not appear there. Why did the Crown appoint me? The northern mines are failing. Your reports warned that illegal blasting could collapse the lower tunnels. The royal secretary chose you to protect the workers and preserve the estate during the succession dispute." Rosamund remembered sending those reports months earlier. Alistair had dismissed them after Lavinia insisted that closing the tunnels would ruin Ashbourne. He had allowed production to continue. How soon could the tunnels collapse? Eleanor's face tightened. After the thaw, or after one more blasting charge? A distant rumble passed through the ground. Dust fell from the tunnel ceiling. "That was not thunder," Mrs. Wren said. Rosamund closed her eyes. The largest shift worked underground that afternoon. Nearly 80 men, including boys as young as 13, would be inside. Lavinia is destroying the mines, Rosamund realized. Once the estate fails, she can purchase its debts through intermediaries and control the land through Julian. "And blame the collapse on your management reports," Eleanor said. "She already has documents bearing your copied signature." Rosamund stood. "Mrs. Wren, take Eleanor and Clara to the toll house. Lock the door and admit no one unless they give you this." She removed the serpent seal from the birth record and placed it in the midwife's hand. "You cannot return alone," Mrs. Wren protested. "If the miners are still below, every minute matters." "What about the Duke?" Rosamund looked back toward the darkness. "Alistair chose Lavinia's advice over my warnings. He can decide whether to keep doing so." She followed the tunnel back toward the archive. Voices echoed beyond the hidden wall. "You signed the order," Dr. Harcourt told Alistair. "You declared the Duchess unstable and the infant illegitimate. You cannot reverse your testimony merely because the consequences now frighten you. I can expose yours. And admit publicly that you condemned your wife without verifying a single accusation?" A pause followed. Rosamund waited. This was the moment Alistair had avoided all morning. Truth at the cost of his pride. When he answered, his voice was steady. "Yes." Rosamund opened the hidden wall. Alistair stood near the trapdoor with blood on his temple. 2 men lay wounded beside the shelves, but Harcourt held a pistol against Julian's chest. The boy's face was bruised. One arm hung uselessly at his side. "I tried to reach the Crown Magistrate," Julian said. "My grandmother's men stopped me." Harcourt pressed the barrel harder against him. "Give me the birth record, Duchess." Rosamund stepped into the vault. "It is no longer here." Harcourt's expression sharpened. "The mines will collapse," she continued. "If you kill Julian, Lavinia loses the heir through whom she planned to control Ashbourne. If you kill me, the Crown will ask why its appointed estate guardian died hours after her order was forged." For the first time, Harcourt looked uncertain. Rosamund faced Alistair. "The blue succession ledger contains the original royal order. We need it, but the miners must be warned first. I will ride to the mines. You ignored my last warning. I know. No, you have only begun to understand." A second underground blast shook the archive. One wall cracked from floor to ceiling. Harcourt turned toward the sound. Julian drove his shoulder into the physician's chest. The pistol fired, shattering a lamp. Flames spread across the fallen papers. Alistair seized Harcourt while Rosamund pulled Julian away. "Go!" Alistair shouted. Rosamund helped the injured boy through the passage. Before closing the wall, she looked back. Alistair had Harcourt pinned against the burning shelves, but armed men were descending through the trapdoor. At their head stood Lady Lavinia. In one hand, she held the blue succession ledger. In the other, a lit taper. Lady Lavinia lowered the taper toward the blue succession ledger. Rosamund released the hidden wall before it closed. "Burn it!" she called. Everyone in the vault froze. Lavinia's elegant face appeared through the smoke. "You have always mistaken defiance for intelligence. And you have mistaken the only copy you found for the only copy that exists. It was a gamble. Eleanor had said the original royal order was hidden inside the ledger, but official appointments were never issued without another record remaining in London. Destroying the local document would delay Rosamund's claim, not erase it. Lavinia studied her too carefully. "You are lying." "Then test me." The older woman held the flame beneath the leather cover. Fire caught along its edge. Alistair lunged, but Harcourt seized his coat and dragged him backward. Two armed men blocked the passage between them. Lavinia did not look at her nephew. "You should have listened when I advised you to send her to an asylum," she said. "Instead, you staged a chapel spectacle. Now half the county knows exactly when your judgment failed. Alistair struck Harcourt hard enough to send him against a shelf. You forged the medical statement. I gave you what you wanted," Harcourt gasped. A reason not to feel deceived. The ledger burned in Lavinia's hand. Rosamund pulled Julian into the tunnel and closed the stone wall. The last thing she saw was Alistair charging through the smoke as the archive ceiling began to crack. Julian leaned against her, struggling to remain conscious. "You must leave me." "No. The minors matter more. You matter too." She wrapped his injured arm against his chest with a strip torn from her underskirt. The joint was dislocated, but forcing it back into place inside a collapsing tunnel risked further damage. They moved toward the toll house. Halfway there, the ground convulsed beneath them. Stones fell from the ceiling, and a section of passage collapsed behind them with a roar. Alistair could no longer follow. Rosamund pushed aside the toll house hatch. Mrs. Wren and Eleanor waited above with Clara. "Take Julian," Rosamund ordered. "I need the mare." Mrs. Wren caught her sleeve. "You can barely stand. Then I shall ride before my body realizes it." Eleanor pressed a small brass whistle into her hand. "The emergency signal at the mine uses 3 short blasts. The overseer may refuse your command without the Duke's seal." Rosamund looked at Julian. "Do you have it?" His face had gone gray with pain, but he reached inside his coat and removed Alistair's signet ring. "I took it after the chapel," he admitted. "I needed to copy his authority onto the order that brought me to the dispensary." Mrs. Wren stared at him. "That was you?" "The first order was genuine. I changed the escort instructions so I could reach Rosamund before my grandmother's men." Rosamund took the ring. Julian had committed forgery to counter another forgery, but there was no time to judge him. "Protect Clara. If anyone comes, use the burial road to return to St. Anne's." She mounted the mare and rode toward the northern mines. Pain pulsed through her abdomen with every stride. By the time the mine towers appeared, blood had soaked through the inner layers of her gown. The yard was crowded with carts carrying black powder. Far too much black powder. Foreman Briggs stood beside the shaft, shouting at workers to lower another crate. "Stop the charge!" Rosamund called. Heads turned. Briggs stepped into her path. "The Duke removed your authority." Rosamund displayed Alistair's signet. "He restores it." The foreman examined the ring, but did not move. "Lady Lavinia ordered us to blast the lower eastern wall before nightfall. That wall supports the river chamber. She said your inspection report was false. I measured the fractures myself." Briggs glanced toward the men waiting near the lift cage. Most had wives or children who had received treatment at Rosamund's dispensary. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "the first team is already below." "How many?" 73. "Signal evacuation. If we stop without written authority, I lose my position." Rosamund climbed down from the mare. "You may lose 73 men." Briggs still hesitated, so Rosamund raised Eleanor's whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts. The mine yard fell silent. Then the warning bell began to ring. Workers abandoned the powder carts. Men rushed to the lifting mechanism, while Briggs shouted that the Duchess had no authority. Rosamund stepped onto the platform above the shaft. "My report predicted the eastern supports would fail after repeated blasting. If you lower another charge, the river will break through the wall and flood every tunnel beneath us." A miner in the crowd removed his cap. "She warned us last month." Others began murmuring. Briggs seized Rosamund's arm. "You are under accusation for falsifying estate records." She pulled free. "Then arrest me after every man is above ground." The first cage emerged carrying 9 coughing miners. Another followed with 8. Rosamund counted each face. 17. The ground trembled again. A messenger rode into the yard bearing Lavinia's green serpent seal. He handed Briggs a folded command. The foreman read it and turned toward Rosamund. "Lady Lavinia says the blast must proceed. She claims rebels have seized the mine and orders me to arrest you." 2 guards moved forward. The miners closed ranks around Rosamund. "No one touches the Duchess," one of them said. Another lift cage rose. 25 men safe. 48 remained below. Then the winding engine stopped. A steel cable had jammed. Rosamund ran to the mechanism. The main gear had been deliberately chained, and the keyhole bore fresh scratches. Someone had sabotaged the evacuation. "We can cut the chain," a worker said. "It will take half an hour." A low boom rolled beneath their feet. The final charge had detonated. Water thundered somewhere below. Rosamund looked down the shaft as desperate voices rose from the darkness. The miners were trapped. And standing on the lowest rung of the emergency ladder, staring up at her through smoke and falling dust, was Alistair. He had escaped the archive only to enter the collapsing mine. In one hand, he held the charred remains of the royal order. In the other, he carried an unconscious child. "Lower a rope," Rosamund shouted. The miners secured a line to the winding frame and dropped it into the shaft. Alistair tied it around the unconscious boy before continuing his climb. Men pulled the child upward and laid him at Rosamund's feet. She recognized 13-year-old Thomas Briggs, the foreman's son. His skin had turned blue. Rosamund cleared mud from his mouth and listened at his chest. No breath. A faint heartbeat remained. She tilted his head, forced air into his lungs, then pressed firmly against his chest. "Come back, Thomas." Foreman Briggs dropped to his knees beside her. "Please." Rosamund continued until the boy coughed river water across her sleeve. His father sobbed openly as miners carried him toward the infirmary hut. "Now cut that chain," Briggs roared. Alistair reached the top of the ladder as workers attacked the steel links with hammers. Blood ran down one side of his face, and his coat had been torn nearly in half. Rosamund did not move toward him. "How many remain?" 47. "The eastern corridor is flooding. You entered without warning me? I came through an old ventilation passage from the archive. It collapsed after I passed." He placed the scorched papers in her hand. Half the royal order had burned, but Rosamund's name and the crown seal remained visible. "Lavinia destroyed the ledger," Alistair said. "I saved what I could." A violent tremor shook the yard. The lift cable groaned. "The cage will not hold if the shaft shifts again," Rosamund said. Alistair pointed toward the southern pumping house. "There is another exit through the drainage tunnel. It was sealed 20 years ago. My father sealed it after smugglers used it. Lavinia's cabinet contained a map showing it had been reopened. Rosamund understood why. The tunnel provided a hidden route for removing ore and concealing stolen profits. Where is the entrance? Behind the river wheel. Rosamund took the mine plans from the foreman's office and spread them across a powder cart. She calculated the distance between the trapped men and the drainage tunnel. They can reach it if we redirect the water into the abandoned western chamber. Briggs stared at the map. Opening that gate requires someone below. "I will go," Alistair said. Rosamund looked at him. He had once permitted other people to bear the danger created by his decisions. Now he offered himself without asking for admiration. "You will follow my instructions exactly," she said. "No pride. No improvisation." Yes, she marked the route with charcoal and explained where he must turn the emergency wheel. A mistake would flood the occupied corridor instead. Alistair took the map. Before descending, he paused before Clara, whom Mrs. Wren had brought to the mine in a covered cart. He did not attempt to touch her. "Keep her away from the eastern yard," he told Rosamund. "Lavinia sent men with another powder wagon. I heard Harcourt ordering them to destroy the shaft." Rosamund turned to Briggs. "Search every cart." Workers surrounded the yard while Alistair descended. They found the wagon near the eastern storage shed. Beneath a canvas cover lay 6 powder barrels connected by a single fuse. The fuse was already burning. Men scattered. Rosamund seized a shovel and cut through the glowing cord inches before it reached the first barrel. A gunshot cracked from the ridge. The shovel flew from her hand. Lavinia stood above the mine yard beside Dr. Harcourt and 4 armed guards. "Complete the blast," she commanded. The miners formed a wall around Rosamund, but Harcourt aimed toward the powder wagon. One bullet could ignite everything. "You have lost," Rosamund called. "The original crown order survives." She raised the charred document. Lavinia smiled. "A burned page carried by a woman your husband declared insane? Carried by the woman the crown appointed to expose your theft." The older woman's expression hardened. Below them, the mine bell rang once. Alistair had reached the western gate. Rosamund studied the ground between herself and the powder wagon. Lamp oil leaked from one barrel, creating a dark trail toward the ridge. If Harcourt fired, the entire yard would burn. She lifted her hands and stepped away from the miners. "You need me alive," she said. "Without my testimony, the Crown investigates every Ashbourne account. With my confession, you can blame the fraud on me." Lavinia considered the offer. "Come up alone." Rosamund began walking toward the ridge. Mrs. Wren understood first. She quietly rolled the powder wagon behind a stone retaining wall, blocking Harcourt's line of fire. When Rosamund reached the slope, she drew Julian's stolen key from her pocket. "You used this to enter my birthing chamber." Lavinia's gaze followed the key. That single moment of distraction was enough. Briggs struck Harcourt from behind with a mining pole. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air. Workers rushed the guards. Lavinia seized Rosamund and pressed a small blade against her throat. "Call them back!" Rosamund smelled bitter almonds on the metal. Poison. Then the mine bell rang 3 times, the signal that the drainage gate had opened. Water thundered into the abandoned chamber. Moments later, men began emerging from the southern tunnel. One after another, the trapped miners returned alive. Alistair appeared last. When he saw the blade at Rosamund's throat, he stopped. Lavinia smiled at him. "Choose carefully, nephew. Your wife, or the truth about what happened to Eleanor's mother?" Alistair looked at Rosamund. This time, she did not wait for him to choose. She drove Julian's key into Lavinia's wrist. The poisoned blade fell. But before the miners could seize her, Lavinia whispered the name of Eleanor's mother. Rosamund heard it. So did Alistair. It was the name engraved upon Rosamund's mother's grave. Alistair's face emptied of color. Rosamund kept her foot upon the poisoned blade, while miners restrained Lady Lavinia. "My mother died 22 years ago," she said. 5 years before Eleanor was born." "Precisely," Lavinia replied. "A dead woman cannot deny giving birth. The name had been stolen, not the child." Lavinia had used Margaret Bell's identity to conceal the real mother and create a false trail leading directly to Rosamund's family. If Eleanor ever discovered her birth, Rosamund realized, "You intended to accuse my mother, and then claim I entered this marriage knowing Alistair already had a child with her. One scandal can ruin a woman," Lavinia said. 2 can erase her." Alistair stared at his aunt. Who was Eleanor's real mother? Before Lavinia answered, Harcourt broke free of Briggs and ran toward the powder wagon. He struck a match. Alistair tackled him behind the retaining wall. The match fell into wet mud. Miners dragged Harcourt upright, while Rosamund took his medical bag. Inside, she found green sealing wax, a serpent stamp, and a bottle labeled as a heart tonic. She opened it and recognized the bitter almond scent. The same poison coated Lavinia's blade. "You used this during my labor," Rosamund said. Mrs. Wren examined the bottle. It caused her Grace's collapse. And while I was unconscious, Harcourt changed Clara's records. Harcourt remained silent. Rosamund removed a second vial. Its contents were colorless, but dried foxglove leaves clung beneath the stopper. "You poisoned Alistair 3 years ago as well." The Duke looked at her. Rosamund remembered his sudden fever, irregular heartbeat, and the repeated worsening that followed every dose Harcourt prescribed. Her own remedies had saved him only because she had stopped the physician's medicine. Lavinia had attempted to remove Alistair before. When Rosamund saved him, she became the greater obstacle. A carriage entered the yard. Mrs. Wren lifted Clara defensively, but Eleanor stepped down with Sister Honora beside her. Though bandaged and weak, Eleanor carried a tin document box. "I found this beneath the toll house floor," she said. Inside were letters written by Lydia Reed, the apothecary's daughter whom Alistair had loved as a young man. One letter described Lavinia taking her newborn while Harcourt restrained her. Another stated that Lydia had survived the birth and intended to petition Alistair's father for her child's return. The final letter ended mid-sentence. "Where is she?" Eleanor asked. Lavinia smiled. "Ask the man who buried her." Everyone turned toward Harcourt. The physician's composure finally cracked. "I did not kill her. The old Duke ordered her confined at Blackmere House." Alistair stepped closer. "My father owned no house by that name." "Not your father," Rosamund said. She looked at the serpent stamped upon Lydia's letters. Blackmere belonged to Lavinia. A magistrate arrived shortly after sunset, accompanied by crown officers Julian had managed to summon before being captured. They arrested Harcourt and seized the forged orders, poison, stolen account books, and charred royal appointment. But Lady Lavinia was gone. During the confusion, one of her guards had cut her bonds and escaped with her through the powder shed. "She will flee the county," Alistair said. "No," Rosamund replied. "She still needs Julian recognized as heir. Tomorrow's emergency succession hearing will draw the royal secretary, your relatives, and every witness from the baptism." Lavinia would not abandon the prize she had spent 17 years preparing to seize. She would make one final attempt to destroy Clara's legitimacy in public. The following morning, Rosamund returned to the same chapel from which she had been expelled. Clara wore no ducal ribbon. Instead, the original birth record rested against her chest beneath a plain white blanket. Inside, Lady Lavinia was already standing beside the baptismal font, and in her arms she held another infant. "The Duchess's child died last night," Lavinia announced to the assembled court. "This is the true Ashbourne baby, and I can prove Rosamund exchanged them." Rosamund entered the chapel without slowing. The same congregation that had watched her expulsion now turned toward her. Crown officers stood beside the royal secretary, while Julian and Eleanor waited near the front pew. Lady Lavinia raised the infant in her arms. Mrs. Wren exchanged the babies to hide the Duchess's adultery. Rosamund approached the font. "Then allow me to examine the child." Lavinia hesitated. "You would destroy the evidence. The royal physician may watch." With the secretary's permission, Rosamund unwrapped the infant. The child was older than Clara, well-fed, and bore a painted crescent beneath one ear. Rosamund dampened a cloth and wiped away the mark. Murmurs filled the chapel. "This baby was taken from the parish orphanage last night," Rosamund said. "The matron has already identified him." Two crown officers escorted the orphanage matron forward. She confirmed the child's identity and produced the register recording his removal by Dr. Harcourt. Lavinia turned toward the physician. He stood under guard, his face gray. Rosamund placed Clara's original birth record beside the baptismal register. Dr. Harcourt altered the delivery time and used Lady Lavinia's seal to hide a message beneath the wax. Mrs. Wren witnessed Clara's birth. Sister Honora can testify that the same pair falsified another infant's death 17 years ago. Eleanor stepped forward. She and Clara bore the same hereditary crescent beneath their left ears, the mark once carried by Alistair's mother. Then Rosamund produced Lydia Reed's letters, Harcourt's payment receipt, the forged travel accounts, and the surviving half of the royal order appointing Rosamund temporary guardian of Ashbourne. Each item answered another lie. Lavinia had intercepted Lydia's letters and hidden Alistair's first daughter. Years later, she forged Rosamund's handwriting to lure Alistair home and make him suspicious. She exploited that suspicion after Clara's birth, intending to remove both mother and child while placing Julian under her control. The mind fraud supplied her profit. Clara's rejection supplied the succession crisis. Yet Rosamund did not allow Alistair to hide behind manipulation. "My husband knew he had returned from Scotland," she said before the court. "He remembered the night our daughter was conceived. He refused an independent examination, accepted forged evidence, and publicly condemned us because doubt wounded his pride less than admitting he might be wrong." Alistair rose. "Every word is true." He faced the congregation before which he had rejected Clara. "Rosamund never betrayed me. I betrayed her. I endangered our daughter, signed away my wife's freedom, and gave my authority to those who used it against her, my workers, and my estate." He surrendered his signet to the royal secretary. "I relinquish control of Ashbourne, pending the crown's judgment. The Duchess's appointment must be honored." The secretary restored Rosamund's authority and recognized Clara as Alistair's lawful daughter. Eleanor was publicly acknowledged as his first child and granted an independent settlement, though she could not inherit the dukedom. Julian renounced every fraudulent claim made in his name. Harcourt confessed after officers revealed the poisoned vials in Lydia's letters. He was charged with abduction, forgery, poisoning, and conspiracy. Lydia was found alive at Blackmere House, weakened by years of confinement, but able to identify both conspirators. Lady Lavinia lost her property to restitution claims and was taken to London for trial. Alistair received no simple forgiveness. The Crown suspended him from managing the estate and ordered part of his personal fortune placed permanently in trust for Clara, Eleanor, the injured minors, and Rosamund's dispensary. Months later, he publicly restored the ducal ribbon he had torn from Clara's gown. Rosamund accepted it, but did not return to his house. She established her own residence beside the rebuilt dispensary and governed Ashbourne under Crown authority. Alistair was permitted to visit his daughters only with their mother's consent. He spent the following year repairing miners' homes, opening the estate accounts, and testifying against Lavinia without asking Rosamund to reward him. On Clara's first birthday, Rosamund carried her into the chapel. Alistair waited in the rear pew rather than beside the font. He approached only when Rosamund nodded. "May I hold her?" he asked. Rosamund studied the man who had once believed his title gave him the right to decide truth alone. Then she placed Clara in his arms, but kept one hand beneath her daughter's back. It was not forgiveness. It was a beginning whose terms belonged to her.